Hello everyone and welcome to the Planning Game Podcast, your weekly podcast for real world planning solutions to real world planning problems. My name's John McDermott from Town Planning Expert. Let's get right into it. Okay, so this podcast today is just me, and it's going to be a bit of a short one, but it's going to be a discussion about a common planning subject that I get asked a lot about. And the purpose for these sort of little stings, as they're called apparently in the biz, is just to give you some background information. So the noises you hear in the background, just to put you in context, I've recorded this whilst on the Property Developers Retreat in Bali. It's one of the 4 retreats I do a year, 2 for White Box and 2 for TPX. And it gives me a good opportunity to spend some time working on business and what we're doing and how we are working things and planning things going forward. So let's just talk a little bit about a subject that a lot of people have asked me about. And the subject I'm going to cover is pub conversions. Now, let's break this all the way back. There are about 407, last time I looked, pubs listed for sale on a variety of different websites, the biggest being Floret, which is, the major pub chains go-to estate agent. So, if there are so many pubs on the open market, why is it so difficult to convert a pub? Now, that's an excellent question and deserves an excellent answer. And the answer comes in paragraph 93 of the 2019 NPPF, which says, very simply, that pubs are community assets. They're protected. And in order to get rid of one, you have to demonstrate that the pub is no longer required. Now, this is further reinforced by a few pieces of legislation, but the biggest of all being the Asset of Community Value regulations, which allows a community to say to a planning authority, to a council, look, this pub is important to us. It is vital. It's there and it needs to be kept. And because it needs to be kept, we want you to put an asset of community value on it. Now, what does that mean? Well, the ACV regs are really well worded, and what they actually do is put a moratorium on the ability to sell the pub once it's become an ACV. That moratorium exists to allow the community to set up a community interest group and to purchase the pub using the funds of that community interest group. That's what it does. The moratorium exists for 18 months as per the current regulations in order to allow the community to set up as they need to. Okay, so now we understand where the protection lies. Let's move that on a stage and actually look at what can we do about it and how do we deal with that layer of protection. So here we have to then turn to what the planning authorities say. Now, as with all things, different planning authorities have different ways of dealing with the same problem. There is no national rule that tells us what to do. There is only the local rules that provide the meat on the skeleton that is the National Planning Policy Framework. So we have to turn to the local rules. Now, every pub is different. Every planning authority is different, albeit there are some similarities in the themes they present. So there are 3 different types of policy that I've ever encountered when dealing with a pub conversion. The first and most common is that there is no policy at all. So that's where the council have actually decided, you know what, we're not fussed. we're not that worried. The big example of that in my local area is Portsmouth, where they don't have a policy protecting their pubs. They've got 189 at last count in the city. That's plenty to be getting people bladdered and then some. So they've said, you know what, it's not important. It's just not that important for us to protect individual pubs. They do so only in areas where there are broader spectrum protection. So, for example, in a town centre where you would not normally be allowed to convert the ground floor anyway, they say, that's fine. Pubs are an appropriate town centre use. We want them in the town centres, so put them in the town centres. Moving that on a step, you have pub conversion policies such as Richmond. Now, Richmond and its pub conversion policies focus very much along the line of there has to be another pub within a reasonable distance. So it can't be the last pub in the village. Yeah? And Richmond sets that reasonable distance as 100 metres. Has to be another pub in 100 metres in order to service that community need. And this policy takes its focus from the idea that if pubs are dying, if pubs are going the way of the dinosaur, right, then what we have to do is protect them, and we protect them by making sure that there is a last pub in the village. So in Richmond, if there isn't another pub within 100 metres, you wouldn't pass the policy, you would fail. And it's difficult to make that policy work in any other way. Now, the final type of policy is the community asset policy, and that very much takes the focus of, right, their assets are community value, so prove to us that they're no longer required anymore. Well, how do we do that? The normal route one is to utilise the marketing tools that you have available. So ideally the pub would have been on the market for a year, ideally it would be vacant, and ideally you would be able to evidence all of that. A vacant pub is more painful to deal with for a planning authority than a open pub is. Moving this on a step then, let's set the game up. So let's say you have a pub that's been vacant for 5 years but has not been marketed. It's literally just been left to rack and ruin. There, a fourth mechanism kicks in, because the National Planning Policy Framework says a building that's been vacant for a substantive period of time needs to have a new economic use. It needs to find a new way. And how do we do that? Well, we do it via a conversion. So if you're able to evidence that the property has been vacant, the pub has been vacant and has degraded to the point where it cannot be used as a pub again over that period of time, then you can sidestep potentially the marketing parts of this problem and move yourself on to the more substantive of, well, it's been vacant, it's not being used, no one wants it. Once you've proved that, then you have to look at what you're doing with the building itself. So again, there are different types of pubs and it's always difficult to generalise, but let's generalise them into 3 or 4 key types. And let's see where this discussion is going. And as with all of my podcasts, they're unscripted. This is just coming from my personal knowledge, my knowledge of the system, and of course, research. So I think there are 4 key types of pubs. Town centre, housing estate, heritage, and countryside. So let's try and deal with them. So a town centre public house, as it's described by its title, sits in the middle of a town centre location. It is the typical Wetherspoons that sits in the middle. So there will be an overriding third policy. There will be a policy that sits there that says, okay, a pub is an appropriate town centre use. We're not going to get rid of the pub on the ground floor. You have to try and keep it or get it converted into something, shall we say, a little less problematic, such as shops or estate agents or anything in classes A1 or A2. A3s, A4s, A5s, so cafes, restaurants, public houses and takeaways all generate noise at late night. Whereas shops and other services don't. And they do make fabulous conversions into shops. Once you've got the building converted into a shop, then you have some permitted development rights you can play with. So in actual fact, the planning application that you make is not for the loss of the pub to resi, it's the change of use of the pub to, say, shops. And once you've carried out that conversion, once you've changed the pub into, say, 2 shops, you've got another permitted development right. Class G comes along like a freight train, unless the council try and remove it. And on the basis of South Northamptonshire's last effort at trying to remove it, the inspector's not going to take that very kindly. But that all being said, the Route 1 should be get it converted to shops, get those shops used, and then you get your Class G permitted development rights above, 2 flats above each shop. So if your pub goes to, say, 2 shops quite happily on the ground floor, then that's an allowance of 4 flats above it, without any of the problems of a pub on the ground floor. You're trading a town centre use for a town centre use, so you don't have the policy harm biting you. That deals with town centre. Moving on to estates. So when we're talking about estate pubs, we're talking about pubs that were built inside of housing estates or housing areas. They're there to serve the local community. I was going to use a different term there, but let's call them a community for the purposes of this. Normally it's a rugby team or a football team or a darts team, or people who habitually go to pubs to go and get themselves boonered. And they're there to serve a particular function and purpose. So, with estate pubs, we're very much going down the marketing route. We're very much going down the 5-year rule, and then we're converting the existing building. Now, why would we do that? And the simple answer is, if you're doing a conversion, let's say your pub's in a problematic area, it's in a flood risk area, say. If you do a conversion rather than a knockdown rebuild, your pub is immune from a sequential test. It's immune from certain parts of the MPPF that tell you not to do it. Because a pub is a vulnerable use, as is a dwelling. The car park, the area alongside, provide you necessary car parking, and as we did, for example, on the Washington Public House, whatever's left over, get houses, get flats built on it. Very simple, very straightforward. The one marker with estate pubs is they tend to have a lot of car parking. So albeit in the 50s when apparently everyone drank and drove, or drove their car to the pub and then drove home again. That is, of course, now not socially acceptable. Heritage public houses. Older pubs. Pubs that have been there for years and years and years and years, and it would be a crying shame for them to fall into disrepair. Most of these are listed. You'll find them in countryside locations, on major coaching roads, certainly not as part of a housing estate. You might find a much smaller area of amenity space around it. Here your duty is very, very simple. Preserve the heritage asset. Preserve or enhance is the test. It's it's a key test and very, very easy to get to. There, what you're doing is you're preserving all the original features. You have the lovely windows, the doors, the oak beams, everything. I've dealt with a couple of preservation pubs before, and they all work reasonably well. You might not have such a big car park, but look for stable blocks, look for those things like that. You'll find a lot of these pubs in the Greenbelt, and of course, the last paragraph of Para 145, Para G, or Exemption G, the total comprehensive redevelopment of buildings, vacant or redundant buildings in the Greenbelt, as long as they do not have an overriding effect on openness or create an overriding effect on openness. Look for those exemptions. Your final public house type. Your final type is the classic pub that's just there. It's fallen into a state of disrepair. No one entirely knows why. It might be part of a terraced street. It might just exist in the middle of nowhere. These are often very, very difficult to predict because you simply don't know what's going on around them. Here, a constraints assessment is very, very important. look at its surroundings. I was dealing with one in Bristol for a couple of investors where the constraints had changed. You know, everything in this was the last pub, and everything around it had been altered to such a significant degree that actually knocking the building down and starting again was the right way of doing it. And knocking the building down to put 4 stories back on instead of 2, because the constraints of the surrounding area had changed to that marked degree, was the right way. Have a look at what your pub is presenting. Don't go in with your eyes shut. Look at it properly. If you need help, talk to your friendly neighbourhood planner and see how you can explore this. From that, I just want to talk a little bit on securing these deals and protecting yourself. So some say that they have to go in with an off-market and not subject to planning deal because no one's going to sell them a pub subject to planning. Others say that the only way they will do the deal is if they can get planning permission, and they will only go in with a subject to planning offer and will offer higher. Here's my view. Both are valid as long as you know your risk and your reward. So when you do an off-market and not subject to planning, you have to know that your property is going to be worth the value that you pay. You're not paying any hope value in that. You're not paying any planning value in that. You're paying market value for a pub, or below market value for that building. It's bricks and it's mortar and all that is there too. It has to be worth that amount of money at the back end for you not to take any risk. I see a lot of people buying these type of properties and taking all the risk. They say, well, I have to offer above its value because I'll never get the property purchased, and that's not the right way of doing things. If you do that every day of the week, your risk factors go up significantly. The alternative is, of course, subject to planning, which often takes pub companies quite a lot of persuasion in order to do. In the main, they've probably already had their planners look at it, so they will know. So, for example, Punch Taverns use white, young, green, and they will know exactly what they can reasonably squeeze out of that building. Yeah? So offering them under that is going to prove difficult. Always know what your risk and reward is. Okay, guys, I think that about wraps up my sort of thoughts on pub conversions. I'd love to hear from anyone who listened to this and thought it was useful, worthwhile, etc., etc. I'm going to be doing a few more of these whilst I'm out here on the Sunshine Isle of Bali. I'm also going to be talking to a lot of the guys who come out here. We're going to do a few podcasts whilst we're out here and load them in so that you can enjoy and experience what's going on, talking a lot more about planning and about business and about how development works. I'll see you guys for the next one. Well, hopefully you'll hear from me on the next one. And you have a very, very good day.